When the Tolkien estate looked for a studio to sell the rights to Lord of the Rings to, they didn't want to have any Third Age adaptations, but in another world they might have been fine with them. The Third Age has a few big events that could have been adapted to screen as spectacular TV shows if written well. Just like with the Second Age, these events are more of a list of events and mini-stories rather than full stories from start to finish. But using the information we have in the source material, you can make a reasonable version of the story. Of course, it wouldn't be called Rings of Power, but it would be the big budget Lord of the Rings TV show instead. There are a handful of events that are great candidates for adaptation: the Civil War and then reuniting of the realms in Arnor, the fall of Arnor, and the story of the alliance between the steward Cirion and Eorl the Young of Rohan, among others. In the 1400s there is, however, the story of the Kin Strife, which is a story that shares some similarities with the House of the Dragon Season 1. I have never read the book that the show is based on, so I can't comment on future seasons. They aren't the exact same story, but the resemblance is striking to me. The 20th king of Gondor, Valacar, son of Romendakel II, married the daughter of the king of the Northmen, much to the dislike of many of the people in Gondor. For the high men of Gondor already looked askance at the Northmen among them, and it was a thing unheard of before that the heir of the crown, or any son of the king, should wed one of lesser and alien race. For these reasons unrest grows in Gondor, and when Valacar is old, rebellion starts in the southern regions. Upon his death, a full-blown civil war ensues. His queen had been a fair and noble lady, but short-lived according to the fate of lesser men, and the Dunedain feared that her descendants would prove the same, and fall from the majesty of the kings of men. Also, they were unwilling to accept as lord her son, who, though he was now called Eldacar, had been born in an alien country, and was named in his youth Vinitharia, a name of his mother's people. Instead, they rallied behind Eldacar's second cousin, Castamir, who was also the lord of the ships, and there was war in Gondor for 5 years, until Castamir besieged Eldacar in Osgiliath, until hunger and the greater forces of the rebels drove him out. And Castamir set Osgiliath ablaze, but Eldacar fled to Rhovanion, where his mother's people lived. Now Castamir had the greatest support from the coastal regions and from the havens of Pelargir and Umbar, but due to his cruelty and political mishandling of Gondor, other regions began to resent his rule. He executed Eldacar's captured son, Ornendil, and his slaughter and destruction in the preceding wars far exceeded what was necessary, and the people of Minas, Anor, and Ithilien did not forget it. It became clear that Castamir didn't care for large swathes of the kingdom, and he further lost favour when he tried to move the capital of Gondor to the haven of Pelargir. So 10 years into Castamir's rule, Eldacar returned with a force of Northmen and northern Gondorians, where he won a great battle at the crossings of the Erui, and slew Castamir himself. But Castamir's sons fled and took control of Umbar, where their descendants would harass Gondor for centuries. Now, it's not hard to imagine that this story could be structured in such a way that you spend the first season covering the last years of Valacar's rule, and the political divide between those who support Eldacar and those who support Castamir. Thus you would have 2 shows about a succession crisis surrounding the legitimacy of the king's heirs due to their lineage and a dying king, particularly because Viserys' death is how I imagine the Dunedain would die. Valacar dies at the age of 238. Just 10 years earlier, however, he would look like he was around 60. He would be able-bodied and able to participate in warfare. But in just 10 years he would age rapidly and decay into a shadow of what he was, and per the Númenórean traditions of the time he would die trying to stave off death as much as he could. In this way it would be very unlike Viserys' peaceful death. Valacar would fight to the last painful breath. Presumably he would also be taking the potions of the wise men who sought to prolong life. Therefore, in another timeline, if the Tolkien estate wanted different things, and if someone had pitched their show as a story about the Kin Strife, it's quite possible that we could have had 2 shows with similarities that would be impossible to ignore. Now, the reason for this is simply because these events were inspired by real historical succession crises, but that wouldn't change just how weird it would feel as week by week they followed similar story beats. In concept, that is. It would be hard to equal the clashes of the royals in House of the Dragon, but they would no doubt be there. I hope you found that interesting. It's something that came to my mind recently, and I thought I'd make a video on it. But now I want to go over some information about this channel. Originally, I made it as a response to the Rings of Power, and then I started to think of it as a way to discuss the show and where it had gone wrong with adapting the Second Age. I still have things to say about adapting the Second Age, but now that the show is over, I feel that I could just become a Tolkien lore channel. I want to cover parts of the Legendarium I find interesting, and hopefully give a new and intriguing perspective on it for lore fans, in addition to being a source of information for people who are casually interested. I think there is actually a lot of information in the Legendarium that some of it is always left out from any particular lore video. One idea I have is to do a video series on the Noldorin royal family, explaining how they are related, but mostly what kind of people they were, and what they were like, instead of covering them from the perspective of the events of their life. So that's for anyone who's interested. And now, goodbye guys, until next time.